NATO chief Mark Rutte and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky have honored fallen soldiers at the Wall of Remembrance in Kyiv.
A recent drone incursion in Lithuanian airspace has revealed blind spots in the country's emergency preparedness.
The US military and Iran exchanged new strikes overnight as Kuwait says its airport was hit by Iranian drones, causing significant damage.
Pictures of Ukrainian fallen soldiers are displayed at the Wall of Remembrance in Kyiv. NATO chief Mark Rutte and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky honored them on Wednesday. They laid red flowers and posed for a moment in front of their portraits. The ceremony was attended by senior military officials and representatives of all 32 NATO member states. The NATO Secretary General's visit to Kyiv on Wednesday had not been announced. It comes after a series of large-scale fatal Russian attacks on the Ukrainian capital over the recent weeks. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been appealing to NATO members for help to protect Ukraine from Russian ballistic missile attacks. For their part, Ukraine hit energy and military sites in St. Petersburg with drones at the start of a flagship economic forum there, just hours before Rutte's arrival in Kyiv.
Ukrainian drones struck energy and military sites in St. Petersburg as officials gathered for Russia's annual economic forum. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the Ukrainian military targeted an oil terminal in the city, as well as an enterprise that produces Russian weapons. Russian authorities also confirmed that several of its infrastructure facilities were struck in 3 districts. It comes a day after Russia launched a massive drone and missile attack at Ukraine, killing at least 23 and wounding over 100 people.
Кожен з цих дронів, всі типи російських ракет взагалі не можуть вироблятись без компонентів, які завозять з інших країн. Тобто в кожному з таких ударів є, може хоч і несвідома, але все ж таки співучасть тих, хто працює на Росію.
Zelensky warned Russia is preparing for another large-scale attack on Ukraine and urged allies to toughen its sanctions against Moscow. The Ukrainian leader also called on Washington to supply additional Patriot interceptors, which can intercept Russia's ballistic missiles.
For years, Baltic states squeezed between Russia and Belarus have been warning of the risks that Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine poses to the region. The alert on May 20th for people to flee underground over a drone in Lithuanian airspace was the starkest reminder in years that emergency planning should be fully operational. However, the incident revealed that for many residents, this was not the case.
We knew the shelters. We went to one of them, but it was covered in cobwebs, and it seemed that no one is there for sure, or it wasn't unlocked for a really long time and it wasn't marked. So we then passed another one that also didn't have any signs. And then we came to the one that I'm standing next to at the moment. And yeah, it's the biggest shelter, it seems, from the maps. And we couldn't get in for like 18 minutes probably.
Problems were so commonplace that Lithuania's prime minister, who had taken shelter with other lawmakers, offered a public apology for communication errors and vowed a review of procedures.
I think that you cannot be fully prepared for all the situations and actions. But what we tested and what we actually and how we reacted shows that we have a system, we have a knowledge, we have an infrastructure, but at the same time there's still some gaps that we would like to fix. And I think that there was a good exercise for the government, for the institutions, for the businesses, and for the simple citizens who was participating.
The goal is also to train more of Lithuania's 2.8 million citizens for the event of an emergency and to roll out a network of modular training facilities that could serve as shelters.
China remains a very big problem for the circumvention of EU sanctions against Moscow. EU sanctions envoy David O'Sullivan told Euronews as Europeans are working on a 21st package of sanctions against Russia.
It's one of the biggest sources of circumvention. both in terms of what we call backfilling. This means simply selling Chinese versions of goods which we previously sold as Europeans, so things like household goods and so forth, which is of course perfectly legitimate, but also unfortunately as a platform for the re-export from China of Western branded goods and EU branded goods.
The EU is mainly concerned with China exporting battlefield goods to Russia. The electronic components found in weapons such as drones, missiles or artillery shells. These components are often of US, EU, Chinese or Taiwanese origin with global value chains. These dual-use goods can have a legitimate civilian purpose, but they are used by the Russian defense industry to manufacture weapons. The EU is walking on a tightrope as it also wants to forge closer trade ties with China. The EU 20th package of sanctions against Moscow adopted in April listed some Chinese entities supplying dual goods and weapons to Russia or engaged in sanction circumventions. In reprisal, Beijing banned 7 European defense companies from receiving Chinese dual-use goods.
On a normal day, this train station in Lisbon would be teeming with passengers. However, silence reigned in the morning. The impact of Wednesday's strike against the proposed labour reforms is being felt across virtually all sectors, with a particular impact on transport, hospitals and schools. The Lisbon metro is closed with no essential services, and the buses that are running are not sufficient to meet all needs.
Não tem aqui os metros nem autocarros, então está tendo aqui uma gestão da nossa empresa para ver se conseguem chamar Uber para as pessoas chegarem até o local de trabalho.
The General Secretary of the CGTP, Tiago Oliveira, stated that the strike is seeing strong support and reiterated the aim of halting the labour package presented by the government. The CGTP also accused the Prime Minister, Luis Montenegro, of ignoring the workers' views. The strike was called in protest against the changes of the labour code set out in the Work 21 programme.
The US and Iran exchanged new strikes overnight into Wednesday in their war following a stall in ceasefire talks and negotiations. The US military said it launched strikes on an Iranian facility in response to strikes on Kuwait and Bahrain, which failed to hit their targets. According to the US Central Command, 2 of those fired at Kuwait fell apart en route, while US and Bahraini forces intercepted the missiles aimed at Bahrain. But Kuwait's army later said Iranian drones had hit its international airport, causing, quote, significant building damage and injuries to a number of people. The US Central Command said it responded with strikes on an Iranian military ground control station in the Strait of Hormuz. The latest attacks come amid stalled ceasefire negotiations between the US and Iran, with hopes dampening over the weekend after Tehran stopped communicating with mediators, reportedly over Israeli military actions in Lebanon. On Tuesday, US President Donald Trump disputed reports that negotiations had stopped, claiming they were ongoing and continuing.
Bolivia's political crisis deepens as the country's defense and education ministers resigned on Tuesday after weeks of protests demanding President Paz step down. The protests and around 100 roadblocks have left cities such as La Paz and El Alto isolated. Food, medicine and fuel shortages are worsening. The initial optimism surrounding Paz, who came to power with the backing of US President Donald Trump, has given way to deep economic uncertainty. Workers, farmers, miners, transport workers and teachers denounced the rising cost of living and the elimination of subsidies. Meanwhile, the government accuses former President Evo Morales of encouraging the demonstrations while operating from hiding, although Paz has attempted to ease tensions by cutting his own salary in half. International polarization and public discontent continue to grow. The opposition is now considering a recall referendum to determine whether the president should remain in office.
Beyond Venice's crowded canals, flamingos are taking up temporary residence in the lagoon outside the city. Over the decades, this fragile ecosystem has been profoundly altered, above all by the demands of port and industrial activities. But the scientists and environmental groups working to restore these wetlands say a sharp rise in the number of flamingos may be a sign their efforts are paying off.
In the past 20 years, the number of flamingos in the lagoon has increased very significantly, especially last year's numbers were the highest ever. We still have to be careful when we're trying to, claim that there's a certain trend, because nature is very complicated. There's so many factors, some that change on a short term, others that are changing on the long term.
A project funded through the EU Horizon 2020 program is taking shape, an initiative designed to bring part of the lost ecosystem back to life.
Where we are now is a reconstructed wetland where sediments from port maintenance activities have been pumped into this contained area, and the idea is that it develops the ecological functionality of natural salt marsh.
The presence of flamingos in the lagoon underlines the importance of the Venetian ecosystem and offers a new way for visitors to interpret the canal city and its many islands through their ecological and not just historical and artistic significance.